Okay, well, let's continue on with the program, and we'll jump right into the next example of collaborative process. So we'll have Al Christopherson talk about the Elkhorn Restoration Committee and the Elkhorns. So Al, you're up. They gave you a whole half hour.
Is that
I might cut you short.
Is that enough for me?
I think so.
Well, thanks. It's good to see everybody. It's always good to come to these when you get isolated in central Montana in a small community out there. It's always good to get together with a large group and reconvene with everybody that you've met over the years and get to know. So it's kind of like a Grizzly football game, though. It looks like it's the start of the third quarter and half the group's missing. Okay. Well, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to this group, and I was extremely impressed during the introductions at the diversity and the breadth of attendance at this meeting. You think back 10 or 12 years ago to when the MFRC was formed, and the diversity of a group like this wouldn't have been near this big. So it's really exciting that it's growing and things are changing and adapting, and that's all good. So what's new with the Elkhorn Working Group, or Elkhorn Restoration Committee? I'll give you a little bit of background on a project that we've gotten involved in, and some things dealing with decisions that the BLM made, the processes they went through, what the Elkhorn Restoration Committee decided to do about it, and where we have ended up. So we work in a landscape, the Elkhorn Mountains, which is a very diverse landscape. It goes from river bottom on the Missouri River to Highway Interstate 15. So you go up over the top of the mountains through the Goat Rocks and down the other side. Rangelands, grasslands to alpine to ponderosa pine dry forest. We got involved in a project, several of us as just individual people. Actually, we were members of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and their efforts. In about 2004, 2005, a large working livestock ranch was being subdivided and was the heart of about 6,000 acres of elk and mule deer and whitetail winter range. So there was a effort to acquire that property and move it to the BLM, which in 2007 happened. It became BLM property, so all of us owned it now. In 2009, the BLM revised their land management plan for the area and identified that ranch land as a reserve forage range allotment, which was part of the discussion when they were trying to acquire the property, was to set it up as a forage reserve so it would allow use from other areas of the Elkhorns to be brought into there to let those areas rest when we did management work in them. And so that was done in 2005 in their range management plan. In 2011, 2012, the Elkhorn Restoration Committee was formed and established. So that gives you some background about all the stuff that goes on. Sometimes you never know where it's going to come back to get you. In 2012 through 14, the BLM started doing their assessments on this property about what kind of condition was in, what needed to happen to it to set it up for this reserve, forage reserve. And they incorporated a larger area called the Indian Creek Planting Area. And in 2014, June of 2014, they issued or released their draft planning area document. And then and they do that, and then they take some input and see what people think about it and stuff. A couple months later in August, they released the draft EA, and then a couple months later, they released the draft EA as they had adjusted it, along with an unsigned FONSI. So they put out there what their EA said, what they thought their findings were, and then in October, they put their proposed decision out. So that starts their period of being able to protest and those kind of things. During all of that, they held public meetings, they had field trips, they put out scoping documents, and Elkhorn Restoration Committee responded to every one of those. We wanted to make sure that we had our input in there and on the record at every one of those steps. We just felt it was important to be there. So that was in October. In November, there was a protest filed against that decision, and things moved forward. So in May, the people that filed the protest also filed a petition to stay any decisions. And in May, that decision was denied, so there was no stay issued against the project. And the appeal that had been filed then was to go forward. We were notified that the appeal was going to go forward, the stay had been upheld, or the stay request had been denied, and so the agency was free to move forward. So that's when we decided as a group, and this was a thumbs up vote of every member in the committee, to see if we could be or wanted to be an intervener on behalf of the BLM in that decision. We in April we got a copy of all the appeals, all the stuff that went with it, and we decided, yeah, we wanted to support the BLM in their decision and what they were doing with it. So we had to file a petition with the hearings officer, judge, to be allowed to be an intervener. And so we put together our letter and sent that in. Our letter pretty much said, hey, we're members of this collaborative. This is the backgrounds of all the people we got, the interests we have, and why we're tied to this area and have a key concern in being involved in it. A couple days later, we got a letter back from the court, the hearings judge, that he had granted our motion to intervene on behalf of the BLM. So part of his assessment at the end said, based upon the government's non-opposition, so the BLM had to be agreeable to let us come in, okay? And for related good cause shown in ERC's motion to intervene, said motion is hereby granted, and ERC shall be henceforth be added to the official service list. So that meant we were in the soup now. The first thing that happened is there was a conference call set up by the court for all the parties. So ERC, the BLM, and the appellant were all brought together in a conference call, and they led us through a series of questions. And one of those was whether or not we intended to file any motions in the proceedings. Because this was a request, we were talking about a request for a summary judgment. And everybody said no, they weren't going to file any more stuff than what they had. And we agreed that a public hearing was not going to be necessary. In other words, we weren't going to have to go to some hearing someplace. We could do whatever we had to do in writing. And that the decision would lend itself to adjudication on the written record and for recourse through a summary judgment. So we had to all agree to that. And there was quite a bit of discussion, a lot of questions of the hearing judge. First time I'd ever been through one of those kind of things, so it was a real learning experience. But we got through that. As a result of that, then there was what's called a summary judgment briefing schedule. And so we learned a lot about how this process works. So the first thing that the judge did is he gave us about a month to submit our opening arguments on why we felt that, or the BLM felt that the summary judgment should be issued on their behalf, why we felt it should be issued on the BLM's behalf, and of course the appellants got to argue why it should be granted to them. And So all the documents that everybody had talked about and done and put together were all submitted again as part of the arguments file. We wanted to make sure in our letter that we were trying to be supportive of the BLM and the process. And so we, in our opening thing, we did not take on the 14 or 15 arguments that they had made all the way through. The BLM was going to have to do that. That's what they had to do. They had to argue every one of those points from their standpoint. What we did is we laid out the structure of our committee, who was on the committee, and why we felt that the process that they had used had fulfilled all the legal requirements that had to be fulfilled in taking public comment and disclosure of their decision and hearing people and reformatting their decision and all their conclusions. So it was, we started out thinking, we got to sit down and take these 14 points and we got to tell them how it is. And it's like, no, that's the agency's role. They got to do that. If we thought there were some holes in there, then we could help plug them, but we didn't. We thought it was pretty good. So then we had, once we submitted those, we had 1 month then, because when we submitted them to the court, we had to send like our comments to the BLM and our comments to the appellant, and everybody had to share their comments. So these are all called concurrent things. So then we got to read what everybody wrote and go through it and see if they were talking the way we thought that things had gone. And so on the 31st of August, we had to provide what's called a response brief to the concurrent opening comments. And so we did that, and again, we chose to write a letter that said we agree with the BLM's points that they've put together. We don't agree with the appellants, and we support, continue to support the BLM and the process they've used and how they used it, and don't think there's any errors in what they had done. So we had also agreed that then the third round, so it's like we get to argue why we think it's a summary judgment, and then we get to explain why we think that all the comments that everybody else made were right or wrong, and then we get one last shot to put across the bow and say this is how we really feel about stuff. So that was called the reply brief to the response briefs. And so again, what we did is we said, look, we agree with how they ran the process, we agree with their findings, we agree with their science. This time we added a couple things in. We said, we also think they've been very professional, very technical, and science-based in their findings. And we put that in our letter. We also talked about the science and the soundness of the science they used, and that the appellants had brought forth no science. They had brought forth a lot of opinions and a lot of nasty language, but they did not bring forward any science to dispute the basis of the facts that the agency used to make the decision. So you really get to cut through all this emotional hyperbole mustard crap and get down to the facts. And that was kind of a challenge, because there was a lot of times that we sit around the table, we get red-faced and mad and beat on the table and scream and yell at each other about why we should write this stuff, and then it's like, take a deep breath, come on. The agency is going to deal with all that stuff. And they had been, and they had, I got to tell you, they had a very good attorney who did a really good job of getting to the facts and simply saying, just because you don't like the decision doesn't let you stop the decision. And the only way you can change that decision is you have to bring scientific facts of difference that would make that decision different. And I'd tell you what, when I get to meet that lady one of these days, I'm going to give her a big hug, because she did an awesome job. We need more people to write that stuff. So our reply brief was due on the 23rd of September. Now, we had talked to the area manager and the field manager in Butte, and they were being very nice to us. He said, understand all this involvement that you're involved in, it might be 2 years before we ever get a decision out of the hearings judge to resolve this. So they were, they were just setting us up. Don't be over realistic here. So we're thinking, well, okay, it'd be nice if we got it in a few months. But if we have to wait a year, okay, 2 years really sucks. But at the same time, the stay hadn't been issued, so we knew that they were still going forward with some of the work. And so we got, on about the 28th of September, we got a letter. The judge had signed his decision for summary judgment in favor of the BLM on the 26th of September. 3 days. Friday was the 23rd, 26th was Monday. So that, we looked at that and went, holy smokes. And I've talked to the BLM guys, and they're like, boy, that's, in fact, their attorney was like, we have never seen a decision come out this fast. We've never seen it. We're used to waiting a long time. So I asked her, I said, well, can you talk to the judge and find out what he thought about us being involved and if we did any good? She said, no. But we talked, her and I talked quite a bit, and I've talked with the field manager and the area manager over there. And so we asked the question, did we make a difference? I can tell you that all of the BLM people think that having us involved, the way we were involved, definitely made a decision, definitely made a difference. And they said, we would hope that our decision would have still been that they would have been upheld for summary judgment, but the speed in which it came, they've never seen it. So we feel good about that. We feel good that the speed of the decision was good. We got to work with a really good attorney who really understood what her role as the attorney writing the briefs counter to the appeal points was, and she did a very good job. So what do we take out of that? We were involved in every step. We could go back and show that we had either written comment, we had attended field trips, we had attended public meetings, and we had made comments in every one of those efforts. So the record was clear from our standpoint. The appellants couldn't show that. They basically filed a 1159 appeal on the decision. 11 hours and 59 minutes, 1 minute to go. What else did we learn? It's all process. This stuff is still all process. And we learned what the BLM's process is for being an intervener. And when you look at it, you go, holy cow, back and forth, back and forth. But you know what? It was really good. It was all written, so we weren't on the phone yelling and screaming at each other. But it was all written. It's all in the record. Anybody can track it. And it gave, at least from my perspective, our perspective, we had plenty of opportunity to, if we wanted to get in the weeds and counter any points, we could. So it was very good. The other thing we learned, and I really appreciate, is the fact that just because you don't agree, if you don't bring science to the table that contradicts and can show that they erred in their decision, thank you very much for your input. That was really strong through the whole thing. We also found out that the appellants, at least at this point, don't give our group any credit. Their first response was, these guys don't know anything. Thank you very much. So I'm glad that's what they think, and we'll keep working on that. They said that our support did not add anything to the project and to the determination of the outcome. So that's how that went. It was basically about a 6-month endeavor once we decided we were going to be interveners and started writing all the letters we had to do and the process we had to go through. The good part about that, being an intervener in the BLM process, is that we didn't have to hire an attorney. We could do it ourselves. We are now looking down the gun barrels of the Forest Service decision that's being litigated, and we are about to become much more knowledgeable in the world of amicus briefs. So we're working now on that. So, you know, one of the take-homes we got as a committee out of this was, you know, there's a real good question here, and I know it'll get to the amicus brief issue when that comes up. But you know, we're a group of volunteers. We come together once a month for our meetings. We come together once or twice a month as subcommittees doing all the nitty-gritty analysis and works and things that we do. And then we stand with the decisions. So how is it that somebody comes in at 11:59 and files an appeal or a litigation, and if they win one thing out of the 25 things they listed as issues, they get paid for it? And we go home, thank ourselves for being good volunteers and working hard, and wonder why the system's that way. So with that, I'll take your questions.
Questions. Lots of you got a question.
So here's the file. If you'd like to come read through it, I'll be glad to share it.
As a lawyer, I'll say that actually that's a very seeing how thin that file is fills me with joy.
I'm with you. I'm sure our next one won't be.
Do you know if now that you've gone through the IVLA process, have you gotten any indications if the appellants are going to take it to district court, or have they kind of let go of it?
If they read any of the responses, I think they're done. That's just my opinion.
Pat?
Hey, Al, is there any reference in the decision itself to the collaborative comments as an intervener that would support a position that you have to have standing in order to file some kind of an appeal? Did the hearing officer or the judge reference your part as an intervener as a part of what impacted the decision?
No. But I did talk with the BLM attorney as we were going through this, and she was very clear with me that once we were accepted as an intervener in the process, that we had full and equal standing with the agency and with the appellants. So we had that. So yeah. And then in his determination, when he allowed us to be taken in as interveners in the process, you know, he said the good knowledge or whatever it was, I don't remember what it was. Something. He said something. He said that for related good cause shown in ERC's motion to intervene. And in that motion, you know, we wrote up why we were tied to this area, why we were involved in it, why we were interested in it, who we were. We went through all our members and talked about their ties to the ground, whether they were ranchers with permits or, you know, just sportsmen that hunted and fished and recreated, and people's educational backgrounds with, you know, professionals and technicals, all that stuff. We put all that stuff in there to try and build the picture of about this isn't just some random group you picked off the street corner. It's a random group we picked deliberately.
Other questions? Go ahead.
So I very much appreciate the scientific process and the value of science in these kinds of cases. The problem is that science is kind of like case law. It has to be applied and interpreted appropriately to the specific situation you're dealing with. So I'm kind of curious, since your group looked at the literature and the science, did you take that, that scientific literature, those examples, and apply it to your specific local knowledge of the area? I mean, was that how you use that to make that science more applicable to the details of the specific situation you're dealing with?
We did some of that in the first go-around when we all sat around the table and got mad and everything, because that's what was going on. There were example after example of science research from southern Utah being applied to the Elkhorn Mountains in Montana. And so we had all that kind of stuff pegged, and then we said, no, that's the BLM's job. And if they don't pick it up in their response on the first go-around, then we will pick it up on the second response and be very specific about why the research didn't apply. But they nailed it.
Status, and did you hire your own attorney?
First of all, we did not hire an attorney. We did everything ourselves, but we don't have to as an intervener. We just had to, I called around a few people asking if, sort of experience or somebody do this stuff. And it was like, no, not this. And so we did it ourselves. We had some discussion with the BLM about process. We were very, 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 very careful, making sure any discussions we had were just about process. So I asked, I said, so what do we have to do? He said, well, you got to write a letter to the court and say whatever it is you want to say, why you want to be involved. That was their answer. We did our own, yeah. And I don't think working as trying to get intervener status, you would have to, unless you really wanted to get into a bunch of the legal weeds on process, which we didn't feel we needed to. We've been involved in the process all the way through, so it was very easy for us to say, check the records. We've been there every meeting, every trip, every document.
Great question.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused on this, but I appreciate your talk about that particular lawsuit. But is there a second lawsuit filed this summer that's same landscape? Okay, and that's kind of what I thought, but I wasn't sure. Is your group involved with that one?
Yeah, let me address a couple parts. First of all, this is an appeal with the BLM. And it actually falls under the Taylor Grazing Act language because it deals with a grazing allotment. So it was an appeal to a decision to do infrastructure work on an existing allotment because that was approved in 2009. So they kept trying to bring that stuff all in. Well, those decisions have been made. They're all, you missed the boat. Sorry. So it was an appeal, okay? So now the Forest Service has issued a decision in the Crow Creek area, and that decision was a CE because it was a wildlife fuels project, and that then went straight to litigation. And so we have established a subcommittee of our group that is doing the detailed work of getting us set up to file an amicus brief on behalf of the agency on that decision. And so we're in the process of doing all the things you have to with that. And that does, as near as we can tell, and everything we've gotten, does require an attorney. So we're soliciting anybody who's got a free attorney, let us know. Or one that doesn't cost much but does a good job. So there's a difference between the two projects. The agencies run things differently, so you got to kind of be on one foot with one and the other. But it's the way it is. And frankly, we find that in our landscapes, about a third of our landscapes are, the lands are BLM, a third Forest Service, and a third private. A little bit of state mixed in. And so we work, our efforts are across with all the agencies, state and federal, and private landowners. So.
Another question. A question. Are county commissioners involved in the Elkhorn working group or the Elkhorn?
Yes, that's a really good question. We have one commissioner that sits on a committee, and that commissioner's job is to let us know how the county feels about the stuff we're doing on and give us their input and insights, and then to talk to the other three county sets of, the other two counties that we are involved in the landscape. So they have kind of a twofold job for us. They are also, at this point, kind of the point of applying to the state, DNRC, for some funds to maybe help cover some of the attorney costs that we're going to have to absorb. So, so my comments about volunteers and who gets paid and who doesn't will become more important as we get into this next project where we're actually dealing with probably a paid attorney.
One last question. Brian.
Sounds like what you've done is potential interest to every collaborative, just in terms of the nuts and bolts that you've learned, lessons learned. Without the attorney in the one model, and then you're going to be learning more with this new situation.
Yeah.
But that kind of, if you could share that in some way through the network, I think that could be useful for different folks. Just a thought.
Yeah, I understand. This is, you know, this decision came out the last week of September. I've been traveling pretty much all the month of October, so I've got about 3 or 4 days under my belt of actually going back through this and getting ready for this. So it's. I sit at home looking through my spotting scope as much as I can.
Hey, Joe.
So I actually sit on the collaborative with Al, and I'd like to have a shout out and a round of applause for Al. He handled this mostly by himself while he's traveling around the United States seeing his kids and stuff. So thank you very much for doing this. You stepped up. You know, the rest of us were really busy being retired and everything. And I understand you're busy too. So thank you, Al. I greatly appreciate for you doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next example of a collaborative process is the Whitefish Range Partnership, and that's Amy and Paul. However you two want to do this is totally up to you guys.
Well, there's one microphone, so we're going to take turns a little bit. I've allowed Paul to introduce, at least begin.
All righty. So, well, thank you for inviting us to be here today. Amy and I we've done this a couple times, and we don't practice, so we'll apologize right up front for that, okay? So, I'm Paul McKenzie. I'm the Lands Resource Manager for F.H. Stoltz Land and Lumber Company. We're a family-owned sawmill and timber management business that's been operating in the Flathead Valley since 1912. And so, long-standing operation. We practice stewardship forestry on our own lands and on a lot of private lands around us. We rely heavily on our agency partners to help with our timber supply. And we also live and recreate in the Flathead Valley. So we are connected with the land on just about every front. So when we have the opportunity to work with our neighbors, we try to start there and see if we can't make progress in a collaborative fashion to start with. So I'll be honest, when Amy called me up, first of all, I'm a timber guy. I went to forestry school to learn about trees and how to manage forests and that kind of stuff. Nobody ever told me I had to be spending more time managing people than I do managing trees. So if there's any students in the room, pay attention now that your people skills are going to be every bit as important as your tree skills are sometime in the future. But our conservation partners, you guys you're way braver than I am. You know, they're more willing to call a timber guy up and come and sit in our office than I am to call a wilderness person up and go sit in their office. I'll just be perfectly blunt about that. And so I'll just tell a little story about when Amy and I first met. The community of Columbia Falls is kind of the blue-collar community of the Flathead Valley. And so when Amy called me and said, you know, I'm new to the area, I'm with the Montana Wilderness Association, I'd like to meet you and talk about wilderness, let's go to lunch. And I'm thinking, well, okay, where am I going to do that? In Columbia Falls. And so I started thinking a little bit, and I said, well, we have this new little cafe that kind of opened up. It's a little bit more liberal, and, you know, they have vegetarian stuff and that kind of stuff there. And I said, well, I'll meet Amy there. And so we made an appointment for lunch, and then, of course, I parked the next block over, and I put my dark glasses on and my Plum Creek hat on and walked in. And here's this really nice young woman that wanted to talk to me about wilderness. And it was just my preconceived notions about what I was dealing with were my own problem, not Amy's problem. But since then, we've worked together a lot and come to be good friends. And I have a much greater appreciation for the concepts of wilderness. And I hope that Amy has a little bit better appreciation for active management. So that's how I came to the table here, and I'll let Amy kind of give you her perspective as far as.
So yeah, Amy Robinson here, Montana Wilderness Association. I started with the group, MWA that is, about 5 years ago. And I was literally 2 years on the job, or 2 weeks rather, on the job, and then we had our first Whitefish Range Partnership Collaborative meeting. And I really essentially was brand new to the area, and trying to reach out, as Paul said, to get to know the folks in the valley. I've learned a lot through the process, and Paul and I have worked together in 2 collaboratives now, the Whitefish Range and in the Kootenai. And I think we've both just learned a lot in the process. So that is the story. I think it does take courage to reach out across the aisle, and one of those occasions is when I invited Paul to an MWA gathering and asked him and his wife to come have dinner with us and be on a panel. And I thought, wow, he's going to be in a full room with 60 wilderness lovers. And what's he going to think of this? But he did it. So our relationship has grown since then. So with that said, I will go ahead and start and lay out the Whitefish Range Partnership a little bit for you guys. So there was this knowledge that started bubbling up from the ground that the Flathead National Forest was going to begin forest plan revision. And so all these different people were starting to talk, what are we going to do? How are we going to work in the forest plan revision process? And a lot of people had already done that in different ways, in various fits and starts. And there was this understanding that, hey, those efforts haven't really worked in the past. So what should we do that might be different this time around? And so everybody agreed, hey, what a novel concept. Let's try to work together, see if we can support one another's values on these public lands that we all care about, and see what we can get done, actually. So that's what we decided to do. And then Paul's going to tell you maybe more about that process.
Sure. So 2012, Michael Jameson, who's with the National Parks Conservation Association, some of you might remember him. He used to be with Missoulian down here. Just a unique guy, a lot of vision, strong conservationist. He once again was brave and came and sat down in Chuck and I's office and came to see the timber guys and said, hey, I've got a great idea. So here we are, 2012. I think the forest plan revision was scheduled to start sometime middle of 2013, and here Michael is already thinking about this and how can we get our voice heard. In the landscape that he was particularly interested in is the North Fork of the Flathead Valley. It's about a 600,000 acre landscape that's north of Columbia Falls there. It's got Glacier National Park on the east side of the river. You've got the Wild and Scenic River and the Flathead, North Fork of the Flathead, and then you have about 500,000 or 600,000 acres of Forest Service ownership on the Whitefish Range. It's a unique part of Montana where I'm sure there's not people like this anywhere in the state, but the people that live up there are strong-minded, they're individualistic, and they got strong opinions, and that probably doesn't exist anywhere else in Montana. So the idea of getting folks to get together and see if they can't work together to set their own destiny seemed to make a lot of sense. It's actually a pretty progressive community. They're one of the first communities in the state to form their own neighborhood plan at the county level and actually do some land use planning and zoning in the North Fork on the small amount of private land that's up there. So we knew that they had it in them. The question is, how do we get that energy and all the other people that are interested in the North Fork and focus that into getting some recommendations that somebody like Chip Weber as a forest supervisor can use as part of his decision making in the forest planning process. And so Michael and I, we once again got together and showed up in Chip's office and said, okay, We want to do this collaborative process. We don't really want you to be part of it, but we want to know if you're going to listen to us. And so that's a great question to ask for a supervisor. Are you going to listen to the public or not, right? You know, and Chip in his, you know, in recognition, he'd been doing a lot of collaboration, and he was very open to the concept. But it was also very important to Michael and I that this not be a Forest Service process, that it be a community-driven process. And quite honestly, when we first started talking about this, we really didn't want the Forest Service involved in it at all. You know, we came around to discussing a little more and realized that there was a very important role for the Forest Service to play, but they weren't going to be the facilitators. So at the end of that meeting, Chip said, you know what, go for it, guys. You know, any information that you can provide me that's going to be, you know, a consensus type, you know, message that comes out of the North Fork is not going to be anything but good for our forest planning process. And so that kind of kicked off the process, and that's when we started inviting people. Collaboration's not easy in that you're trying to be transparent and non-exclusive, but at the same point in time, you got to have a workable size group. And I know many folks in this room have gone through this before. And so we early on decided that we want to start off the process by inviting everyone to the room. We want to make sure that it was an inclusive group and that we didn't overlook any interest groups that are out there. We also realized that we couldn't have every individual at the table. And so before long, we developed a kind of a core group of folks that represented what we thought was a very broad-based set of interests that we thought covered the broad spectrum out there. And so that was one of the major principles, is that we had people that were representing interests, not positions. And that was one of the first primary starting points that we started off there. And so that could put a little bit of onus on the people that were sitting around the table. That was almost a representative style collaboration. And that, you know, for me, as a member of the collaborative, I was representing the timber industry, right? The interest of the timber industry. And so it wasn't Paul McKenzie's interest. And so that put a duty upon myself to make sure that I had an open dialogue with the other folks that had similar interests that I do, both within and without our industry. And I think the same thing is with you, Amy, if you want to talk a little bit about how you see that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, you know, there was about 30 people sitting around our table at any given time representing diverse interests, from private landowners to diverse recreation, conservation, business owners, and we really took it upon ourselves to bring the outcomes from our meetings back to our constituency. And that was really important, just to bring people along through the process. We actually met for about 18 months, and we worked in about a dozen small groups to come up with recommendations for those dozen topics. And through that whole process, we'd come together as a large 30 group again, and bring everybody up to speed. So it was a lot of communication. It was a lot of intense work, essentially, and we all worked really hard. There was a commitment by everybody around that table that I found quite inspiring. I was also going to talk a little bit about kind of what, in my mind, what are some elements of successful collaboration. And I witnessed some pretty, as I said, inspirational people around that table, and we developed some strong relationships because it wasn't easy, and with a little bit of difficulty comes a depth in my mind that is motivating. So, for example, I witnessed like a willingness to learn from people, right? I witnessed an ability to be uncomfortable. I witnessed a willingness to understand other people's values, and potentially, yes, change your mind. So that was pretty amazing to see people change their mind right in front of you over a period of many months, and say, wow, I'm looking at that person like a person now, and I can actually kind of understand where they're coming from. People said, oh, I can live with this. Maybe I don't exactly get it, but I can live with this. Let's move ahead. We also had a very talented neutral leader, Bob Brown, former Secretary of State, and he kept us in line. So he was making sure that he drove our meetings and held us accountable. we had a strict timeline, and I thought that that was a real element of our success as well. And then Sarah Lundstrom with National Parks Conservation Association, she also kept us in line and was the very important secretary, administrator, like doing all those nuts and bolts that make these things move forward. And so all of that stuff lends to success. And then I would just say that the Forest Service, as Paul said, they weren't a voting member around our table, but they were involved. They were oftentimes witnessing our conversations, seeing us haggle and grapple and struggle in certain ways and say, wow, look at what these people are doing. And then they also provided resources, presentations, knowledge about resources on the ground that helped our recommendations be more realistic and knowledge-based, essentially, creating this kind of framework to make sure we didn't get too crazy with our hopes and dreams for the Whitefish Range.
So just to build a little bit on what Amy said there, the time frame was really critical. We gave ourselves 18 months to come up with the recommendation for the Forest Service on what a forest plan would look like. That included a map that had management areas on it that were drawn in, as well as recommendations for guidelines and goals for how those areas would be managed. That's a pretty tall order to pull off, especially since we started off with a group of folks that were widely varying in their level of understanding of the resource, level of understanding what the forest planning process was, what the rules and regulations were that we were all bound by. And that's really the role that the Forest Service played for us. They helped us establish the sideboards. And so they would come in on a particular topic. We'd be talking about wildlife or wildfire or timber or what have you. And Chip would have his specialists come in and give us kind of a, the 101 on whatever that topic was. And at the same point in time, give us the sideboards, because we have grizzly bears here, or because we have lynx, or because we have wilderness areas, there's certain things you can and can't do. And that really built a common understanding that was really key for all of us in the room to have the same basis of knowledge about what the rules were and what the realities of the resource were. And so that was very helpful. We spent a lot of time, we struggled through the same things that all collaboratives do as far as, how do we operate, what are the principles that we're going to operate on. But we did spend some time on a shared values statement that I think has some really good elements that I'd like to share, at least a portion of it with you. And it's this. It says, in order that this region remain rural in its nature and that our public access be maintained and that our neighbors be educated about the region's unique values and that we sustain the historic traditions for which this Whitefish Range has come to be known, we must work together in a collaborative manner. And this is the important part. It says, if we do not act deliberately and do not plan together for changing times, then the future of this place almost certainly will be decided by others, okay? And that's the reality of it. The fact that somebody else is going to make a decision if we don't, okay? And that really empowered everybody and brought people to the table. The other thing we decided is that it was going to be an all or nothing deal. Either we were going to find a plan that we could all agree to and support, or we weren't going to submit a recommendation to the Forest Service. It was going to be a failure of our collaborative if we weren't able to do this. And so what that did, it kept people at the table and kept them motivated that they weren't going to get what was important to them unless they could help work through all the issues that were presented on this landscape. And it wasn't easy. And like Amy said, we spent a lot of time in these work groups and these small breakout sessions to work through the small stuff. But little things like, I went into this thinking that out of that 500,000 acre landscape, I expected to get about 50,000 acres of suitable timber base out of it, because that's what came out of the forest planning process that had not quite been completed previously. By the time we got done working with all our conservation partners, we were at 90,000 acres of suitable timber base. I gained 40,000 acres of suitable timber base on a landscape that's full of grizzly bears and lynx and bull trout and world-class views. That's because we had a common understanding that, yes, we can manage this landscape and still have all these other things out there. That's a major win. There's some recommended wilderness that came out of there. That's not something that we started some of our first meetings.
80,000 acres.
Yeah. Started some of our first meetings, and we had Larry Wilson sitting there. There's no way in hell we're going to have any, another square inch of wilderness in the North Fork, But Larry Wilson's name is signed off at the end of that agreement. So it was a.
Sorry, Larry Wilson called wilderness the Wicked Witch of the West in one of our first meetings.
So I can say we had some strong opinions in this group. I just want to reiterate one thing that, that Amy mentioned. That's, Sarah Lundstrom was an incredible resource, but it just is something that I'm sure that many folks have learned in their collaborative experiences, that you have to have somebody that handles administration in order to make a collaborative successful. And that person is generally going to have to be paid, because you just can't do it with volunteers. And Sarah did more than her fair share, and I guarantee that she did more than she was paid for, but it was part of her job to ensure that the communication took place, the emails took place, that the notes got taken, that the documentation got compiled, and that we had that file that Al had somewhere that showed that we had done all these steps. And so when we had people question our process, we had the information to say, you know what, no, we went through that, and here's the information, here's the notes, and what have you, because there are detractors out there. So short version is, after 18 months of hard work, we came up with a plan. And we produced a document that had maps, and it had recommendations, and it had a summary of our process, and we submitted it to the Forest Service as our recommendation for a forest plan alternative for the North Fork of the Flathead Valley. That was not easy to do, but what we didn't realize is we all thought we were done at that point in time, but that was really just the beginning of the process, because the Forest Service didn't start their forest planning process until about 3 or 4 months after we had finished our collaborative process. And so that was kind of an eye-opener for all of us, because here we had to spend 18 months working on collaboration and coming to an agreement. And then, even though Chip was very clear about this with us from day one, he says, you know what, folks, go out and do this good work. But at the end of the day, your input's going to be treated just like anybody else's input out there, okay? And that's just the reality of the situation. And so that was, it was driven home to us when we all started working in the Forest Service collaborative process that they started up afterwards. It was not at all like our collaborative process, and as Chip knows, it made us not all that comfortable. We thought we could do better. But nonetheless, it was a game we had to play, and what we found is that the relationships that were formed in our own collaboration helped us stick together through the larger collaboration that took place on the entire forest. Like I say, we work on about 500,000 acres. That's less than a quarter of the acres that the forest was tasked with planning. And so, so that's when the real work became evident. Of course, there was a fair amount of detractors that said it was a small, hand-picked elitist group that had, worked behind closed doors to develop a plan that was self-serving, and so you just have to have a thick skin. You all know what really goes on in these collaboratives. You know how hard you work and how hard you work to be inclusive, and you're not going to make everybody happy. You just got to be willing to put up with that before you go into that. Want to say something?
I was just going to say that during that process, as the Forest Service was initiating for their revision, a lot of our members of our collaborative were showing up, participating in the small group roundtables, and that was the first time Paul and I began presenting, because we were trying to help the general public understand what we had done in the Whitefish Range, and just generally get the word out there to the people who were showing up in that setting.
So just wrapping up, we're waiting to see what the forest plan is going to look like. We submitted our comments. It's been through the draft. We were disappointed to see that our draft, none of the draft alternatives had our option in any one of it, but at the same point in time, we saw elements of our agreement throughout that entire draft, and we're hopeful that the majority of those elements will survive the draft process and show up in the record of decision when it comes out here any time. So, but that was just one of the outcomes of the collaboration. The relationships, like I said, that we formed in that collaborative response, some other collaborative efforts that came out of this, and one is called the Whitefish Face Partnership. That was not a forest planning collaborative, that was a project-based collaborative looking at the municipal watershed for the city of Whitefish, and that whole big mountain area, Taylor Creek, that whole area just north of the Flathead Valley there for vegetation management. It was once again, it was a citizen initiated collaborative using the Whitefish Range Partnership as a model. We worked with our agency partners and ended up coming up with a vegetation management project that's just went, the commercial part of that just went to bid here last week. The non-commercial parts of it are being implemented as it is, and this is a very contentious landscape. It's the backyard of whitefish. It's the municipal watershed, it's the viewshed for the city of Whitefish, and quite honestly, the Forest Service is understandably a little bit hesitant to jump in there. But after the work done by the collaborative, we kind of gave them the social license to feel like they can move ahead. They also were recipients of one of the Forest and Focus grants to help with the planning process on that as well. So just another example of how good collaboration can spawn other types of collaboration that succeed into the future. With that, I'm going to let Amy share a few concluding thoughts or some experiences that you think. Are we out of time?
I think we should ask questions.
Oh, sure. We'll do that. Anybody have any
We have 6 minutes for questions.
Chip?
So this is only partly a question. I couldn't let this go without some comments. I heard you use words commitment, respecting each other and listening, those kinds of things. And to me, this is an example of an incredibly successful collaborative process. And I'm going to tell a little story, and I'll do it as quickly as possible. First of all, by the time we got engaged in this process, I knew Stoltz and I knew Paul, and I knew that they're the oldest family-owned mill in the country, I believe.
Oh, Montana.
Oh, in Montana. Well, let's see, I was giving you more credit. But I knew they were going to be here. And so the story I'm going to tell is about Amy, and I've never even said this to her, but we were in a conversation about a particular conflict that they were dealing with, and I can't even remember what the conflict was.
Wilderness.
Well, it had something to do with that. Anyway, in the middle of that conversation, Amy, you said to me, and we're still going to be here. And that I became a fan of you that day, that minute. And I remember talking to John Gatchell, and the reason I tell this story is that's really what we ask as an agency, that you're committed, that you're going to be there, because you're not going to resolve every conflict. You're not going to come up with a golden solution, although you came up with a pretty golden one, I have to say, as a group. You did a fine job. But you're not going to make every value the same, and you shouldn't, because it's not going to work well if you do. But that commitment, that presence in the community that Stoltz has, that willingness to be there through the conflicts, that's really what I wanted to share with you. That was so important to me. I would say that was a watershed moment for me, and you just never know what little moments are going to be that way. But that's what I ask of the collaboratives that we work with, and we work with a lot of them: commitment, respect. And so I really want to congratulate you and give you guys a hand for work that was really exceptional.
Hi, I have a question, or I actually have several questions, but I just want to be sure I got this straight. When the early documents on the forest plan came out, you couldn't identify a particular alternative that was really close to yours or somewhat close?
That's correct. So there were 3 alternatives that came out in the draft, kind of an A, B, and C, and they were the traditional low, medium, high type. Just for a summary, low intensity, medium intensity, high intensity management. And the maps were kind of, different acreages of super timber base, what have you. So none of those lined up with what our recommendation for the North Fork area was. But there were elements of our agreement that were in all those.
So the follow-up to that is then how did your group handle that? Or how is your group handling that?
Yeah, one thing that we, again, thanks to Sarah, that we continue to do as soon as through the whole process is comment as a united partnership. So we submitted comments to the Forest Service, basically continuing to advocate for our agreement based on their alternatives. So we think that this part of Alternative B and this part of our Alternative A is the right course.
Thank you.
Other questions? So, I have a question. So, does the Forest Service consider all the work of the Whitefish Partnership beneficial?
Yeah, that's really not a question for us.
I thought it was incredible. Here's what they did. They did the heavy stuff we couldn't do. And because it wasn't us, they could do lifting that we couldn't do. And that's really what it brought us. And you talk to Joe Kruger, the planning committee, he says they came up with solutions that we might not have come up with. And they were powerful solutions. So that is the strength of the power of that diversity of people in collaborative. So yes, I knew that was the
So just to illustrate that, for example, there was a land use designation that had not previously been thought of by the Forest Service called front country recreation. And that's basically the interface lands that are the place where you go after work to recreate and walk your dog and ride your bike. And expecting a higher level of development, higher level of recreational use, what have you there. And so we saw that, in, that was incorporated into the forest plan drafts we saw out there. There's this new land use regulation. So I do think they actually listen to us, believe it or not. Ed?
What other groups or people were involved?
So we had 22 or 23 folks that signed off on it. We had motorized recreation, we had non-motorized recreation, we had wilderness advocates, we had wild and scenic river advocates, we had Trout Unlimited, Backcountry Horsemen, we had North Fork Preservation Society, North Fork Landowners Association, Headwaters Montana, National Parks Conservation Association, mountain bikers, yep. What was that? Tribes, yeah. We worked really hard to try to keep it as inclusive. It was really interesting. It wasn't wilderness versus timber, guys. Imagine that, huh? I think, if anything, we can say we found some new common challenges out there in some ways, as far as the competing land uses that are out there. Recreation, quite honestly, was one of the most difficult topics we had to work our way through. In all, not different types of non-motorized recreation even were very difficult. So.
Okay, very good. Thank you. It's a great example. And one thing that's true is when you get folks like Amy and Paul going to other groups, speaking, trying to explain things to different members of the community, that goes a long ways, because there are things that all of us can talk about that agency folks just can't talk about. So, okay, with that, let's have the coordinator report. Tim Love.
It's getting late in the day, and I'll keep my comments brief. First of all, thank you all for attending this workshop. This is what it's all about, is getting together, and the network is the sum of its parts, and you're the parts. And the folks that aren't here, that work with your groups, are hugely important, so thank you for that. This marks our first year as a network. We came out of the Montana Forest Restoration Committee, and as I said in the annual report, and I hope that you have a chance to read that, it's in your workshop folders, I think we're off to a good start. We were able to assist a number of groups in their organizations this past year with questions and things that they needed. Thanks to Jim Birchfield, we have 9 new dashboard issues papers that he will cover tomorrow. They're also in your folders. We produced our first annual report thanks to your contributions, and I do appreciate that. I thought when we asked for the groups to write something about themselves that it would be like pulling teeth. But frankly, the response was remarkable. Everybody made a contribution, and you'll see those contributions in the report. We're working with the Idaho Forest Restoration Partners on a joint workshop coming March 20th and 21 in Coeur d'Alene. And you'll be hearing more about that, and I hope that many of the groups here will send representatives to that, but we'll keep you more informed about that. We will continue to host this annual workshop and try to make it as relevant as we can to meet your needs. And so we'll ask for feedback. We will continue to share information with all of you, and you can share information with all of us and help us. And finally, we'll keep, thanks to Deb Parker Foley, our website and Facebook up to date with useful and relevant information. So now on to some business. First, in your folders, if you looked at them, on the right-hand side is something called the participant affirmation form. We asked last year if you wanted to be members of this, or participants of this network, that you read that, sign it, and what this does is it allows you to vote on the things that we're going to talk about next. So if you haven't signed one of those and want to be an official participant of this network, please sign it. And there's a box outside near the registration table that you can drop those in. And if you do that right now, you can vote on the next subjects. In your folders is a membership for those serving on the advisory council. We sent out a message to everyone if they wanted to serve on the advisory council to please indicate so. And of course, many of the members who had been and are serving currently on the advisory council are on that ballot. So please mark that ballot and also put that in the box at the registration table. Next, we developed a process because one thing that we learned, we were asked repeatedly by different people to endorse some requests or write a letter of support regarding some issue. And so we developed a protocol that we would deal with these sorts of things. That's in your folder as well. Take a look at that, and we want feedback on that and say if you agree with that process. It's one that we recommend, one that the advisory council recommends, and we would like that vote as well. And finally, one of those issues pertains writing a letter of support to change the fire funding for the United States Forest Service. Specifically, and that's also a ballot measure that we ask your response on, the Advisory Council recommends that writing a letter to the Montana Congressional Delegation encouraging them, which they are doing, to work together to find better ways of funding the cost of firefighting over the present process, which involves taking funds from other programs. It's an extremely difficult situation. Not dictating the terms or how that's done, but simply wanting our congressional delegation to work together, and frankly, they're doing that, and that's a great thing. So please mark those ballots. Jim will announce the results of those tomorrow. Jim. I'll do that. So look in your folder. The protocol is in the fourth divider, if you have one that's marked number 4 on the right-hand side. We stated the mission: assisting collaboration in forest and grassland restoration, conservation, resource utilization for the benefit of all. The first point is the MFCN receives a written request for an endorsement letter of support. Then there's a criteria. Does that request affect collaboration? Does it promote, support, inhibit, or is based on principles of collaboration? Second, MFCN staff reviews the request and shares with the advisory council as appropriate. There could be some that are just, doesn't have anything to do with collaboration. Third, the advisory council and/or the participants of the MFCN's annual meeting will make a decision on appropriate response to an endorsement request. And these responses could take one of the 3 forms that are identified here. Affirm that MFCN will support the request in a manner relevant to the request, such as sending a letter to the public officials, providing public statements through the press, or offer other advocacy or support. B, decline the request with an explanation to the individuals requesting that an endorsement as to why the MFCN cannot provide an endorsement. And finally, take no position on a request, but provide some information about the request to other collaborative groups, which we've done regarding the Cottonwood decision, because that was one of the things that came up. And we thought that is an issue for local collaboratives to take up as they see fit, and not our network. So each might make a decision on their own merits as your collaborative group sees fit. Okay? So that is the process. Jim, anything else for clarification? Okay. So again, I know there's a number of things there. If you would respond to those and put those in the ballot box, and Jim will talk about the results tomorrow. Again, I want to thank all of you, and I know we're going over tomorrow for your participation in the workshop. This is not possible without you. It's not possible without our sponsors and supporters in making this work, and we want to work for you. I also thank Deborah, who is just instrumental to, making this all work, and the chair of the planning committee, Jim Birchfield, does so much for us. Gordy Sander, who chairs the advisory council of folks that we work for, and hopefully are working for you. So that's all I have, unless there's any questions. We can move on. Yes, sir.
Can we have a little discussion about the endorsement protocols?
Sure. Do you have any questions?
Well, just a thought on it, and that is, I'm involved in a lot of groups that regularly put out statements or involved their members or their partners in that process. And I'm a little concerned that we, as a group of collaboratives, that we have to be really careful what the overall organization is moving forward to support. The way that a lot of the groups I work with, such as American Wildlife Conservation Partners, for example, any member of that partnership can propose the wording of a letter to come out that identifies the shared interests of the group, but the letter does not come out as from American Wildlife Conservation Partners. Rather, every member has the opportunity to sign on to whatever they want, so that if an issue comes out that a particular group does not necessarily want to sign on to, it's not then overweighed by the overall partnership. I'm afraid if we have this network that's coming out with statements for the overall network, that we may very well step on toes of some of the collaborative organizations that are part of it. And I think if we had the protocols that said that the advisory council might review requests for letters that come in that would go out to the network, but then rather than have it be endorsed by the overall network, actually have all of the collaboratives have the ability to sign on to that or not under that banner, but not necessarily the overall network saying it's the view of that group.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is one of the avenues that we think is very appropriate for groups to consider, to keep us as a network out of some of those details that might be relevant to some, but not all of the participants.
So our endorsement here is just a yes or a no, though, rather than an alternative.
Maybe you could send me an example that would help me, and we can take it up at the advisory council, talk about it some more. Any other thoughts about that? So write in your comments if you have suggestions, and we'll see where that goes. But I think that is a good recommendation. That is one of the things about being a network is there's you in your groups or individuals, and you're dealing with specific things that might be unique to your group, but the whole network, it may not be. Talk louder. Can you hear me? Question.
Prevent, thank you, Speedy. There's nothing written that would prevent the leadership from going, yeah, this one's maybe a little more, whatever, we should send this out to everyone for a similar thing that we do down at our ground level. I know on the steering committee of the working group that I'm with, there are certain things where we're very comfortable, but there's other things where we're like, yeah, no, this one goes to everybody. So there's nothing written that would prevent leadership from sending that out.
Right, exactly. That's true. And that may be the case in many issues that are brought forward to us, that we shoot it out to you, and then your individual groups make a decision about that and respond the way you want to, rather than trying to develop something for the whole network. That's difficult to do. Yes?
So, oh, thanks. So just a comment maybe about the ballot protocol then. Instead of just having a yes or no box on the issue of wildfire funding, perhaps there should also be a neutral box, because otherwise, if we vote as a group, how is that decision to remain neutral going to be made? Okay. Just a suggestion to think about.
Yeah, note that on your ballot. That'd be helpful.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions? All right. Thanks again. Really appreciate your support.
Thanks, Tim. And maybe what we should have on, rather than a yes or no, is thumbs up, sideways, or thumbs down. Peter.
Just a comment. You know, being a member of an academic program, it's very valuable for me to, say, participate in an organization like this, but I cannot vote for Montana State University Extension.
Right.
So I just wonder, not to muddy the waters, whether this organization might consider having affiliate members, you know, non-voting members, but, you know, because as an organization, it might be beneficial to have affiliate members that are research or academic institutes, but not voting members.
You know, it's a good point. We had that conversation a year ago when we were working on our charter, and I think we've got provisions in there. For example, the agency folks, Forest Service, BLM, DNRC, are not in a position to vote. So there is a category in there where you actually don't formally vote on things. So, but we'll have to review that. Jim can take a look at that and talk about it tomorrow. I think we're okay in the language right now in the charter. So, good point. John, did you have a question?
Just a comment. You know, going back to the endorsement protocol and vote, reading the responding to endorsements, requests, and letters of support, I thought item C of the third comment maybe addressed their concerns about whether or not an individual organization supported it. You know, if there was concern from the MSCM that you maybe didn't have broad support for it, it allowed them to send that information out to those individual organizations so that they could comment.
That's correct.
Thanks.
That's one of the reasons. I think everybody heard John.
You're getting running pretty good, though.
Go ahead.
You know, reading the protocol, I think item C of the third bullet pretty much covers everybody's concern about whether or not individual organizations would have to endorse what the MFCN does. If there's an issue that the MFCN feels is controversial, they can send that information out to all the individuals, and then they can write their own letters of support. I don't know if that covers it or not.
What we didn't want to do is produce just an absolute, here's exactly what we're going to do in every case, because you get inundated, I don't know how many different phone calls, emails Tim gets on different issues during the course of the year. So tried to make it, you know, provide ourselves some latitude. We're not going to take on a lot of positions it's up to the collaboratives. You know, all the collaboratives are place-based, and they have specific issues that they are more and more interested in rather than other collaboratives. So, good point. Thanks. John?
Just a clarification on my point was that I'm just worried that if MFCN starts taking positions, that it's very easy for some of those positions to not fully represent a view of some of the member groups. And you're likely to lose those groups if you start doing that. But rather, if you offer groups the ability to sign on to a common letter that comes out of this that isn't necessarily the Montana Forest Collaborative Network, but is the following groups that represent, you know, the letter could start out with the following groups that represent collaborative efforts on forest issues in Montana have the following view or whatever. The letter that each organization then could propose a letter to the group, and the advisory council could decide whether that letter was worthy of going to the full collaborative. But then rather than having it be from the collaborative network, it's from each of the individual organizations that choose to sign on to that letter. And if an organization then does not feel they can fully support it, they don't sign on to that particular letter, but maybe 2/3 of the collaborative groups want to.
Sure. Well, that's a good point. So we've kind of left the door open to where within the MFCN and the advisory council, we've got a number of different options. That is certainly one of them, John, that we talked about. We don't want to get into the business of generating all kinds of letters and comments. What we want to do is provide information to the collaboratives so you can be the most involved and direct your comments and opinions where they should go. But we're going to provide everybody with as much information as possible. Okay, anybody got note cards for Joe?
Got a few already, Gordy.
Come on up, Joe.
All right.
So any last questions, anything burning from everything that we discussed during the course of the day? Got any hard questions for our first speaker, Patrick Holmes? Go for it. Come on up.
Okay, sounds good, Gordy. Okay, I've got the kind of unenviable position of standing between y'all and the Missoula microbrew here, so we'll try to make this fast. But we do, as Gordy mentioned, we'll make sure that we do answer all your questions during this today and tomorrow. So thank you for those of you that have provided a few. I'll just start out with a few. And the first question is, can you be an intervener solely on a scientific basis, or does it have to be process? And maybe, Al, you know, what you guys have learned in the Elkhorns, I don't know if you're the one that might be one that could field that or not.
I don't know if I'm the one to answer that. I don't know if I'm the one to answer. Yeah, because we just did it as a group from our interest.
Sure, I can give kind of a general answer that it depends on the forum. You know, if you're in front of IBLA versus being in front of a court. But generally, the way to obtain intervener status is to have a significant interest that will be affected by the proceeding. So if you can show as a collaborative group that you have a substantial interest in the project moving forward or not moving forward, or if there's a rule that's at issue, for example, then you should be able to intervene. You don't have to necessarily have a specific scientific viewpoint. If you want to, if there's a circumstance where you kind of want to just set out a specific view or alert the decision-making body or court to a paper, for example, that might be a good time to do an amicus brief just on that one issue. If it's not, you know, maybe it's a project that you're not that wedded to, but you just want this one issue to be addressed.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, are there ways during scoping that collaborative groups can join in shaping the design of a salvage sale projects? What type of joint fact-finding could be most constructive? So possibly somebody from Forest Service or even BLM that might field this one. So are there ways during scoping that collaborative groups can join in the shaping the design of a salvage sale project? So particularly pertinent with this last season's fire season. Chip, I don't know if you want to take a shot at that.
Well, you can. The thing to realize with salvage is that you're under a time gun, but I've seen effective collaboration run under short time periods. You just have to spell that out to the collaborative on the front end. I would get a hold of your local line officer, the ranger, or probably the ranger is the one who's going to be the best contact for that. Secondarily, the forest soup. See how I delegated? And say you want to be involved in that, and just know that you're going to be doing everything under a compressed time frame, which is what we always have to do with salvage.
And then fact-finding, you know, field trips, that kind of thing? Being involved in fact-finding?
Yeah, this is where you involve your forest supervisor because he likes to go to the field. No, I think it's good. Again, you know, we've got so much salvage going on in the region, or so much potential salvage anyway going on in the region now. You really should work with that local line officer. I know as a ranger and now as a forest supervisor, it's actually one of our favorite things is to get on the ground and have people looking at it, because we think it makes the challenges that we face real, and it makes the understanding that the members of the collaborative a lot stronger if they can look at what we're talking about and what they're thinking about.
Matt, did you have a chance to talk to Bill at all on that one question? I'll just shoot it out here. A number of years ago, Senator Chase Vincent sponsored a bill when passed, the legislature allowed DNRC to intercede on the land management appeals. To date, how many times has DNRC done this? And if not, why not? Don't know the answer. Okay. I would imagine the authority's still, I mean, you know, authority's still there for that to happen if it's needed.
No, we don't have appeals anymore, so maybe that's one of the reasons I don't know. You know, it's an objection process now.
Okay, all right. Yeah, the question is, a number of years ago, Senator Chas Vincent sponsored a bill when passed, the legislature allowed DNRC to intercede on the land management appeals. To date, how many times has DNRC done this, and if not, why not? So, you know, I work for BLM, so.
So I know that the state intervened on the East Res project, and the Kootenai Forest Stakeholders Coalition did as well. I mean, is that the same thing, or are we talking about two different processes?
This is DNRC intercede, so, yeah.
So is that, when I say the state?
I don't know, because the Attorney General, I believe, is the one who has the authority to do that. You know, intervene in court or file an amicus, and then they give that authority to the DNRC, is my understanding. And the Attorney General and the DNRC do that, but that is in court, and so I guess I'm unsure about, you know, the difference between in court or in appeals.
Maybe Patrick knows.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I fully understand the question either. There are a number of places where the state, through DNRC, working many cases alongside the Attorney General, has either intervened or filed amicus. We've got 3 of those that are active right now, where we're developing amicus briefs, where DNRC and the Attorney General are perfectly aligned in the position that the state has taken. And the way that we approach that decision, at least from the executive branch perspective, is really trying to find a nexus between the project and a compelling set of state interests. And while every collaborative project likely has a great deal of support on the ground and is important to its local area, not everyone in our mind rises to the threshold at which the state has a really vested interest that covers the entire state. And so when we see those types of instances, we've got a relatively analytical process that DNRC goes through to make recommendations to the governor. The governor then makes a decision, and we work very closely with the Attorney General to get that work done and where possible, enter in on the same page.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, we've got just a recommendation. We'd like to see a participant and or individual membership list with contact information so we can contact each other. Deb, do you want to fill this one? And maybe we're on the website. Do we have that available? Or
we have a list in the packet of members, but I think the question more refers to, rather than individual collaboratives that are members of MFCN, individual membership is something that, right, so that would be something that we don't necessarily have all the information of who, for example, if a collaborative has 20 members, we don't necessarily have the contact information on all of those members. The individual collaborative, any individual that wants to be a member.
We haven't put those on the website. Now that's up to the advisory council to do that. Everyone that signs the affirmation gets our mailing list of things and events, but as far as everyone's individual names that signs the affirmation, that's up to the advisory council. You guys have to decide how you want to disseminate that.
Just one other comment. And part of it is we want to make sure that we're not just sharing public information for folks on the website. So how many of you want your individual names, contact information, and emails on the website? So what we will continue to do is we'll make sure the collaboratives are listed, and as folks go forward, if you want specific information, you're getting the information, all the announcements, go to all the members, individual members, but sharing public information sometimes isn't what people want.
I mean, if I want to call Chip, I don't have a clue how to get a hold of him. So if we try to find it in national forest, I'm available. You know what
I do.
I mean, they do it at every conference. And you don't have to put it on the web. You can just give it to people, whether it's a piece of paper or you email it.
Oh, sure. In fact, if you want to get a hold of somebody, all you'd have to do is call me, call Deb. We'll get you the information.
yeah, and it gets at the heart of what we are. It's a network. You know, how do we network with each other and how best to do that? So I think you have a real good point, Mike. So I don't have any more cards, but if anybody has any further questions, we could entertain them at this time. Any further questions before we break and hit? Is Gordon buying the first round? Okay, folks, thank you very, very much for a great first day for the workshop. Gordy, do you have any follow-up or last-minute thoughts?
Thanks, Joe. No, just appreciate everybody's time and attention and input. And, you know, the objective of the workshop this year as well as last year is to make sure it's very interactive, make sure we have an opportunity to visit with folks. And tomorrow we got a great program, and Jim Birchfield will be running the show tomorrow. So we'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. We'll get going and got some very entertaining conversations.